right, everybody. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Butler's Babble. It's been a while. We took last month off, as you know, Christmas holidays. We wanted to let everybody have a great holiday season, so we didn't do any in December, but we are back. Again, this show is to try and help and motivate and inspire people to empower themselves to be a better them, better for their husbands, their wives, their kids, be better for everybody, and just be better for themselves. We want to be around this place a long time, so we're going to try and help inspire you to do that. So just a couple little housekeeping. Remember, if you're watching this through either YouTube or you're watching it on our Facebook channel, be sure to go to streamyard.com/Facebook and allow them permission to use your name in the comments. That way, when you make any comments here, I can see exactly who's making the comment. I will be monitoring it. Also, I'll try to here on my phone a little bit here because then I can see who it is. But sometimes if you don't, I won't see who you are on here. So just a way if you want to make a comment or questions, and I'm sure our guests would definitely take your questions if you have any. Just if you do that, it allows us to know who you are. Another thing is don't be afraid because some people, they just don't want to be quiet, but don't be afraid to ask questions if you have any. There's no bad questions. Today's guest, I want to bring you, of course, is a phenomenal one. I know I say that all the time, but we do get some amazing guests on here. And if you haven't seen any of the past episodes, don't be afraid to go and check some of them out. Amazing guests. This one's no exception. This is Jennifer, and she's an author. She's a yoga instructor, and she's a former holistic health practitioner. So she's going to come on and tell you a little bit about herself and get to know her. So let's bring Jennifer on instead of listening to me babble on, as they say. So Jennifer, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much, John.
Thank you. So why don't you give everybody a little bit of a background of who you are, where you come from, what you were like as a kid, but also tell us where you are right now, because I'm here in Northern Ontario where it's really, really cold right now and it's very white outside. So give us a little background about yourself.
Sure. So before we dive into kind of the rich, trauma-related things that we'll talk about, first off, I am just outside of Seattle, Washington, and I am actually a true Seattleite, born and raised in the city of Seattle, and lived there for the first 14 years of my life, and then moved down to the San Francisco Bay Area for 3 years, and then moved back to Washington for my senior year of high school up on Whidbey Island. And so I've moved around a little bit, but the Pacific Northwest is always home.
And what were you like as a child? Were you very quiet and recluse, or were you more of a rambunctious, always out there trying to do stuff?
I was probably more the quiet, shy type, especially as a young kid. I remember hiding behind parents' legs as a young kid when being introduced to new people, new adults. Um, I have always been studious, and I love to read. As a kid, loved to read and learn, and I'm a perpetual student and proud to be so. Loved school. Did well in school. Was I a nerd? Probably. I'm not a Hermione Granger per se, but I loved learning and did do well in school, and enjoyed it for the most part. I worked really, really hard in high school in particular. When I was down in the Bay Area, had a great high school. And I was able to do, at least here in the United States, we have advanced placement classes that you can take and then use them for college credit. So I honestly worked harder my junior year of high school than I did my freshman year of college.
Did you have a favorite subject?
Good question.
Did it have anything to do with what you went into as a profession, or was it more like anything else, really? Were you into
Like,
the arts more?
yes and no. So I graduated from Washington State University in Eastern Washington, East Washington State, for those of you who are confusing Washington with Washington, D.C. My degree was in animal science because I have always loved animals, and particularly horses. I've been a horse person for as long as I can remember, one of those horse crazy girls growing up. And I thought that I was going to be an equine veterinarian.
Okay.
And the university I went to they're an agricultural school, have a fantastic veterinary program. So I thought that I was just going to get my degree and go right into veterinary school. But, even though I started working for veterinarians when I was 16, by the time I got to probably about my last full year in college, I realized that even though I loved what I studied and I
Hmm.
was pretty good at all those subjects, anatomy, physiology, immunology, and not all of those were necessarily animal specific, although we as humans are animals, but some were human. But the way a nerve fires in a cow is the same as it is in a human, so it doesn't
Hmm.
matter. Um, but I just didn't see myself doing that day in, day out. And of course, other things happen, like meeting my now husband in my
Hmm.
just before my last semester of university. So that changed things as well.
Always
Uh,
happens.
right. And so, yep, throws off your trajectory and your plans, but in a good way.
Exactly. Well, I see that with
Um,
a lot of students actually right now, where they go and they have an idea of what they want to be, and then they go into school for that, and either they decide, like you did, like this is not something I want to do day in and day out, or they get a degree and then they come out and they can't find a job in that, and they end up doing something else
right.
anyway. So it happens all the time. So,
Absolutely. So out of graduating, I actually did work for a veterinary clinic for probably a good 6 months, and it was a good experience, but it was a good experience in me learning that I wasn't going to go anywhere
hmm,
unless I went back to school. And having just gotten out of school, I was like, I'm not ready to go back,
yeah,
at least for another like 4 years
yeah.
back in Eastern Washington.
This is like
So
your early 20s, I guess, or
yes, yes. And I heard about equine massage, so horse massage,
mm,
and was like, oh, that's interesting because that kind of combines my education as well as my interests. And so I started looking into that and talked to some practitioners locally. And at the time, here in Washington State, you had to go to human massage school to get licensed, as well as go to the animal massage school to get certified and also licensed to work with animals. So I did both concurrently at the same time. And in 2006, I was licensed to do both and then got married and started working as a massage therapist for a local clinic for people, of course, just like 2 weeks after getting married. So 2006 was a big year.
hmm.
Um, and I ended up starting my own practice at the age of 24 in
Wow.
2008. Um, and it just kind of progressed from there. I still did body work with horses, although as the years progressed and I changed modalities in my practice, going from clinical massage therapy to a modality called structural integration, my focus changed and I really focused on the human aspect of my practice. But it was incredibly rewarding. I loved it. I was good at what I did. And I don't say that in an egotistical way, but I was a good practitioner. And all the while dealing with the things that we're going to get into.
No, definitely. No, definitely. And I'm trying to find, as you're talking there, and you can go on a little bit more about it. I'm going to try and find some of the pictures you sent me that we can share.
Yeah, yeah.
So,
So one of the pictures that maybe you'll be able to pull up. So as I said, I was a horse crazy girl growing up, and yes, I did start riding probably about the age of 9 or so, 8, 9. But I got into a sport called vaulting at the
okay.
age of 11, which is gymnastics on horseback.
Oh, okay.
And I did that for a good 6+ years.
Hmm.
And when I lived in California, I was on one of the best teams in the world at the time, and was very, very privileged to be on that team. And we traveled to Europe numerous times a year to compete and to also exhibition sometimes. So it was a blast. And people go, is it like jumping over the horse, or is it like jumping over the fences, which is called jumping? The vaulting, if whenever you're able to pull up that
Yeah.
picture,
Yeah,
um,
I'll find it here.
it's yeah, it's essentially. I mean, people are familiar with gymnastics. So if you think of like a beam routine or a floor routine, but on the back of a cantering horse.
Okay.
And there are also team events where you have up to 3 people at a time on the horse, and it's choreographed and with music and things like that. So it's a very organized sport,
Mm-hmm.
and a very challenging one when not only are you having to figure out how to move your own body in certain ways, but then also to be in sync with another living sentient being. So you have to be mindful of how you're moving, and be kind to the horse that we're on as well.
No, definitely. I'm going to share you the email because I was having trouble finding the where you gave it to me, but I do have the email with the pictures in it. So we'll show that.
Oh, great.
There we go. So I don't know if that's what you're talking about right there, that picture there.
Yes. Yep. So that's my last year. That was our national competition,
Okay.
and that was not a transition. I was actually holding that handstand for a couple strides. So pretty
Yeah,
cool.
just they do it and they take a picture and then you fall off or something.
Right. No, sometimes that happens. Absolutely.
Exactly. And
And
then this is
people
you
often
actually
wonder,
working.
kind of, yes, yes. So I was a licensed body worker for 14 years, 12 of those running my own practice, and about 9 of those doing structural integration. And so these were in the last year of my practice. Obviously, my hair has grown a bit since then, but structural work is different from traditional massage. And for anyone who's interested in finding out more about structural integration and how it realigns people's bodies for lasting change from things like chronic back pain, neck pain, etc., you can check out, it's theeasi.net. I think it's THEIASI.net, I believe, or just Google structural integration.
Yeah. Or we can
Uh,
always, you can send it to me later. We could put it in the comment section for people also
sure.
if you want.
Yeah. And also a certified yoga instructor, which I became in 2016. And really enjoyed teaching some private and small groups, as well as I've worked for a couple studios. So movement, bodies, and all of that have definitely been my thing
Definitely.
professionally for quite some time.
Awesome. No, it's amazing to see the differences that you went through. I mean, you go from this to horses and things like that. So you're in your 20s, you're doing your business, you're starting to find your groove of what you want to do. And then of course, that's when you're married by now. I don't know if you had kids by this time, but now all of a sudden things start to change in your life.
Yes, they do. And we just have furry 4-legged children.
Yep.
Um, Currently, we have a cat and a rabbit, and we had a corgi for 16 years. And
Oh, okay.
she left us
Oh,
just about 6 months ago. So, yes, our furry 4-legged kids have entertained us and kept us covered in hair and love, which is great. Plenty of hair to go around. But
mm-hmm.
yes, in 2013, and when I was 30, things changed.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, and there happens to be a whole book about it, a brief book, so it's short.
I
Head
have
of
it
Hope.
right here.
Excellent, thank you so
Yeah, and
much.
I've actually been reading. I'm not finished it yet. You can see my bookmark in there. I'm about halfway, and I'm still reading it. So amazing book. I love the way you tell the story in here. It's very easy to read. So why don't you go a little bit about what happened?
Yeah, so I'll give you the Cliff's Notes version. So I was in a writing lesson, a dressage lesson, so English writing, with my friend and trainer who I had been writing with for years at that point.
Hmm.
And I was riding with her one day, but I was riding a horse that I had not ridden before.
Okay.
I knew the horse, I knew who she was, but I had not ridden her before. And we were having a pretty good lesson, having a few arguments as I was asking her to do some very difficult things. And we were probably a good 3/4 of the way through the lesson when she suddenly spooked.
Mm,
And no matter how good of a rider you are or you think you are, physics sometimes is not on your side.
yeah.
So she completely hopped right. I came off left. I, of course, was wearing my helmet,
Hmm.
but still landed really, really hard on my back. And I did not lose consciousness. But the details are in the book of kind of what happened
Hmm.
there. But once we figured out that I didn't have any broken bones, I did what any crazy horse person does and got back on, just to end our ride on a good note. And but I knew driving home, it was about an hour drive home, and on the freeway, and I was getting increasingly tired and like ridiculously tired. And I was just like, oh my God, I have a concussion. And
The first thing that
this
comes
is
to
where
mind,
like
of
things,
course.
yeah. And this is where things start to come together with like even my professional education is back in massage school way back when. I wrote a paper about the most common horseback related riding injuries and then treatment thereof. And the number one is concussion.
Okay.
And so that's the only way that I had any kind of clue, because I don't think it would have even registered otherwise. So thank you for massage school for making me write a paper. And I, even before I left the barn, I'd actually contacted one of my colleagues who has passed now, but she did craniosacral therapy, which is also, I go into detail in different modalities in the book, and that's one of them. And said, I hit my head, I need to see you. And she said, well, I can see you tonight. And I said, oh, I just really want to go home and ice a little bit. And it was just an absolutely horrible night. I'm hoping, knocking on wood here, that it was the worst night ever of my life. I was in so much pain. And did I even think to go to the emergency room? Well, yeah, it crossed my mind, but I didn't want to worry about the cost of it. Because even with good health insurance here in the United States, a trip to the ER is still quite an exorbitant cost for most people. So, and I was like, oh, I'll be fine, right? Like, it's, probably no big deal. And so after getting some treatment from my colleague the next morning, she convinced me to go to the ER and get a CT scan to make sure I didn't have any internal bleeding. And I was like, okay, Nancy, for you, I'll go. Still not even really thinking about like, oh, this is something that, it's probably a good idea, like for my own benefit. But for you, I'll do it. And so I went, and thankfully no internal bleeding, but I very, very distinctly remember the ER doctor coming in after examining me and then, stepping out for a minute, coming back in, and he kind of comes back in dramatically and goes, congratulations, you're concussed.
Yeah. I remember reading that in the book.
Yeah. And, those words were an interesting choice to use, honestly.
Yes.
And they gave me some over-the-counter pain medication and a 2-page handout with just some general guidelines, and said, basically, take it easy. And they said, you'll be fine in 2 weeks.
And that's the thing
Well,
I
I'm here
find
to
with
tell you
people with
9 years.
concussion. Yeah, they get sports, everything. They're just told, oh, it's just a concussion. You'll be fine. Just take these and you'll be fine.
But I'm here to tell you that 9 years later, having now become legally disabled and have a huge laundry list of related diagnoses, I was not fine in 2 weeks. But I had no reason to think otherwise. And so it was a couple months later when insomnia got really, really bad. I mean, I was sleeping maybe 3-4 hours a night. And for anyone who's either had new babies or any other reason that your sleep is disrupted, I mean, we understand why sleep deprivation is literally used as torture. Because it is. it literally is torture. And, I had like light sensitivity, noise sensitivity, and those are things that I still experience today, among others. And I didn't really know what to do or who to see. And even though I knew people who knew people and being quite well educated and things, I still didn't really have any guidance. And thanks to it was one of my chiropractors who sent me in the direction of a functional neurologist. There we go. And I started working with him for a while on a daily basis for a good many months, and that was very helpful. And But, like starting to realize that I had PTSD from this. But the thing I didn't mention, I can't believe I forgot to mention this, was that on the way home from getting that CT scan at the ER, we were just about maybe 4 kilometers from home, and going through an intersection where we had the green light, we had the right of way, and a woman in oncoming traffic turned left directly in front of us in the intersection. Once again, physics not on our side.
No.
And so my husband, who he was driving, because I, of course, was in no condition to drive. It was 25 hours after the fall from the horse.
Okay.
And so we unfortunately collided with her, not terribly, but go figure, it was the passenger side, my side, of my 1-year-old car, the only car I've ever bought brand new, that was damaged. And I couldn't even open the door. And of course, more pain. I was on pain medication. It's like prescription strength Motrin, so like ibuprofen, but still. And I was so exhausted. I was so angry. I was, again, more concerned about my car than I was about myself. And to add to the story, I literally closed accident-related treatment to a very severe car accident in which I was also passenger. I closed that 6 weeks before, and that car accident before was almost exactly a year prior. Wow. So I called my personal injury attorney on that Monday, 2 days later, and I said, I have another one for you. And I went off about my car, and it's like my practically brand new car, and it's damaged, and it's gonna have an accident on its record. And she's like, stop, like, how are you? And I was like, oh. So,
cars can be replaced.
Exactly. But that just goes to show you and everybody kind of what my mentality was, and how it was not driven home how serious a concussion is.
Yeah.
And especially when you have 2 impacts in 25 hours, how much that second car accident on the way home, affected things. We can't say for sure, but it certainly didn't help.
Definitely.
But I kept working. It was the week before our Thanksgiving, and so I didn't have as many clients. But I did take it a little easy. But I mean, I didn't take any time off of work. Self-employed, got to keep my practice going, and I just kept going. And it was eventually when I really started noticing that things were not right. I was not right. Emotional dysregulation is really, really normal and common with a brain injury. And I'd go from kind of feeling normal, happy, to like explosive angry for not a very good reason. And it was just like all over the place. And my poor husband.
Mood swings.
Totally. And just not being able to control it, which is the weirdest thing, because we're used to being able to control and regulate our emotions. But with brain damage, those areas, depending on, of course, which areas are more damaged than others, get compromised. And so you don't have the ability to control it, at least very well. And it took a long time and a lot of work with different practitioners to kind of rein that in a bit. But it's, it's still there, but definitely not to the same caliber.
No. And I remember reading in the book too, how you were saying how you got to the point where you were not afraid to start firing some of these doctors because some of them were just not giving you the information you needed to know.
Yeah. And I've had some great practitioners, and I've really appreciated the ones who have helped me. And yet, because our medical system is broken, and it's common knowledge, but because there was no real guidance, I had to piece all of this together myself, both allopathic, AKA Western medicine, as well as holistic practices, and just try to navigate all of this on my own, which when you're dealing with all these things, insomnia and, like brain fog and emotional like all the stuff that you're dealing with, and then trying to navigate who to go to, and then trying to explain it all to everybody and on repeat. It's challenging.
Yeah.
And then things kept coming.
Yeah.
That was like just the start of the journey. And it's been quite the roller coaster. Things that show up commonly are things like depression. When you damage your brain, you change your neurochemistry. And so it's kind of a very common thing. And that's been published on since the 70s. So that's definitely a well-known fact. So about a year later, that was something I was dealing with. And, that just made life hard.
Yes.
And I went from this very active person, like super active, like I was this go-getter, either up always up early at like 5:30 and at the gym or at the hot yoga studio by 6, and then go to work and then do stuff and, just kind of the go type A personality. And to not be able to do that as the fatigue kept getting worse over time, and kind of flash forward because we'd be here forever going through all the details of the things that have happened since.
Yep. Take your time.
But ending up with chronic fatigue syndrome, which is very real. It's not a psychosomatic thing, even though sadly, there are some physicians who still think that it's not a real condition. And it can take a long time to get adequate and proper diagnosis of different things that show up. The whole time since my injury, I dealt with getting lightheaded frequently and didn't really know why. And like I'd be at the gym and I'd be doing something that wasn't even like lower body, kind of big muscle group things, and get lightheaded. And you just see me just sit down in the gym. I was like, why is this happening? And some of these other symptoms. And then I figured it out for myself. Honestly, it wasn't any of my providers who even brought it up, of having dysautonomia, which is dysregulation of the autonomic nervous system. So that's the nervous system that regulates all the things that we generally don't think about. So things like blood pressure, heart rate, gut motility, and a bunch of other things. But dealing with that for the whole time, and it took 7 years to get that diagnosis. And 4 weeks ago, literally got another diagnosis, not related to the brain injury part, but all of the whiplash injuries that I've had between coming off of horses and then these 2 car accidents created some structural problems in my neck, which finally, after 9 to 12 years, got diagnosed 4 weeks ago and treated. So it's been and that also was not brought up by any of my practitioners or my providers. It was actually some of my peers who brought it up. So it's been quite the learning process, especially learning how to advocate for myself with providers. And even though I've had some great ones, still I've had to be the one to really be in charge, which is sad.
No, exactly.
Because we go to
you rely on them. Exactly. You rely on them.
Yeah, to get guidance and counsel. And I feel like I've been sadly having to tell my providers the things that they should be telling me. But it is what it is.
No, exactly. And you touched on it a little bit earlier too, but during this whole time in that 7-year span or whatever, you were also, you touched on a little bit, it's a little bit of the sleep apnea that you were doing where you were just having trouble. You weren't sleeping at night. You were going sometimes, maybe an hour or two sleep at night, or not even sleeping at all?
Yeah. So insomnia. So not actually sleep apnea.
Okay.
But yeah, that was really the worst in the first 6 months post brain injury, post that, those 2 incidents in 2013. And it took a while to kind of get that dialed in, but it was actually not until 2017. So it was like 3.5 years later that I worked with a sleep specialist. And the only thing we really did was change my sleep schedule, which you would think like wouldn't be a big deal. But I actually I held a symposium for some of my colleagues and health professionals on sleep. So I got to hear some sleep specialists talk. And so I understand that it's all about the ratio of how long you're in bed versus how long you're actually asleep.
Mm-hmm.
And that was not a 1-to-1 ratio for me. So I learned some strategies, which did help. But yeah, it took till 2017 to get some more info there, and that started to help. And then it was like a week later, still getting more information. Got diagnosed with pituitary damage. So the pituitary gland is right behind kind of the between your eyebrows, and it's about the size of a pea, and it controls the majority of your hormones. I won't say all hormones, but the majority of them. If the pituitary gland itself doesn't produce a particular hormone, it produces usually the predecessor for hormones. So things like thyroid, what you need to produce cortisol, and of course, different hormones, testosterone, progesterone, estrogen, which both male and female bodies have. So, yeah, like for anyone who knows females in your life, hormones affect so many things for us in particular, with so many fluctuations. And so that's been, yeah, a constant thing where I have to get my blood work done every quarter because my body just has a hard time regulating that. So, just like all these things that just have like kept coming. But I want to share about these things because most of the time when people think about concussion and brain injury, they're thinking about the football players. So we're talking about either soccer players, as we call it in the States, or American football. People like that. But there are 3 million new TBIs every year in North America. And those are the ones that are actually diagnosed.
Yes.
And those are, per the research that I used for my book, the studies, that's diagnosed through either ER visits, hospitalization, or death.
Yeah.
Only those 3 things. So I can only imagine how many, probably several more million, are undiagnosed or misdiagnosed every year.
And you got to remember, I'm in
Yeah.
Canada here, where our big sport is hockey, and so much concussions with hockey. And especially, I don't know if you've ever seen, but they've done specials on back, of course, in the 70s, the 80s, and things like that, before the hockey it is now, or it's a more faster game. Back then, you had guys on your team that were just there as what they called enforcers. So they protected the rest of the players. They were always the ones that were doing the hard checks, getting into the fights and all that. And these were the guys that their career was cut short because they were always getting injured, and it was always head injuries, and they found out it was concussions. And then later on in life, a lot of these hockey players that were very famous ended up committing suicide, things like that. And people were wondering, well, you had all this money, you had all this life, you should be... and they didn't realize the brain injury that they had from all those years playing the type of sport that they did. So concussion is a very, very serious thing that people, like you said, they think of it in like little minor sports, and they're like, oh, you just got a concussion, go home, just don't go to sleep right away, watch them when they go to bed, wake them up every couple hours, and they'll be fine. They don't realize the actual severity that it can cause in the long term.
Right. And they're classified as mild, moderate, or severe. And I want to make it really clear that so those designations refer only to the amount of physiological damage to the brain itself. In no way does it reflect the impact that it has to the person's life. So my concussion is a mild one, but it still had severe ramifications.
Yes.
So people will say like, oh, I just had like a minor concussion. Yep. There's no such thing in my opinion, in my book. And the thing that I have thought about, like, if I could go back and do something differently, what would that be? And I've talked with people in the TBI support group that I attend. We've asked that question of each other. And I think one of the most common ones, and myself included, is I would take it seriously at the beginning, much more seriously. Definitely. But I mean, I was told I'd be fine in 2 weeks. So I really had no reason to take it as seriously as I should have. And
they're the specialists, so you're taking their word for it.
Oh, yeah. They're the ER docs. They're the ones who should know about this stuff. But so there's a lot of opportunity for change in the medical field, as well as among society and common knowledge um, of the impacts that this has. And I mentioned that my chronic fatigue syndrome kind of gradually progressed and got worse, no matter what I did, no matter who I saw. Again, very educated, very proactive. But you know what? Sometimes you can still do all that and stuff happens.
Mm-hmm.
And so I ended up in end of January 30th, 2020, closing my practice. And as I talked with you earlier about, in a way, I feel like I dodged a bullet with that going into 2020, but still it was very hard to say goodbye to my practice and my clients and my livelihood. Thankfully, my husband is very supportive. But then I later filed for disability, and that took almost 2 full years. And it was a very, very challenging battle, as it is for everybody. And it's not a fun process by any means, but thankfully that did come through. So, life has really changed. But despite the way that it sounds of like, oh, here she was, this, entrepreneur and go-getter, and now she's disabled. It's not all bad. It really isn't. And even though I would never wish for anybody to go through this, nor would I want to go through it again, I have gained so much from this experience that I wouldn't change that part for anything. Not only being able to do things like advocate for myself, but I have so much more empathy. Like, it has taught me so much more about what empathy actually is and relating to people and their experience. Especially when it comes to things like trauma. And, trauma is subjective. What someone thinks is traumatic may not seem traumatic to someone else. Doesn't matter what anyone else thinks. That's the person's reality.
Yes.
And so, learning a lot about that and how to be truly supportive for somebody, which has nothing to do with me wanting to feel better about trying to fix you, but rather being present with other people's pain and suffering, and just being there, being present with someone.
So now that you've had to close your practice, have you now looked at, now you got disability, so you got some time that you can think of what you want to do now, because you're still a young woman. You're in your early 40s. I shouldn't be aging people like that, but
not even, I'm not even 40 yet.
There you go. So you're a very young woman.
Not even quite 40.
Very young woman. So you still got lots of life left, knock on wood, of course. No more head injuries, of course. And so has this now led you into maybe another path of what you want to do with your life, more on that kind of a scale? Because, of course, you were with horses and you were looking at being a veterinarian. Then you went into the whole training part that you were doing with, like we showed the pictures earlier of what you were doing with your career before. Now that you're not doing that, is it sort of leading you now career-wise or to something different, or?
Well, that's to be determined. Depends on if anything changes, which I'm not attached to. If things change for the better, great. If they stay the same, I'm okay, right? And that's okay. But I still want to make a difference in the world. I still want to have purpose. And I've struggled a lot with that in the last couple of years, especially since I closed my practice and then not knowing with disability. I was teaching yoga just once a week on Zoom for a studio, but I've put that on hiatus for right now, and really just been focusing on taking care of myself. And most people understand that taking care of yourself is a full-time job.
Definitely.
But I love talking about these things, bringing awareness to traumatic brain injury, which I wanted to make clear that a concussion is a traumatic brain injury, that they're synonymous. Sometimes people think that a traumatic brain injury is something different than a concussion. That's not the case. So if anyone's confused on the terminology, it's like saying trash or garbage. It's the same thing.
Okay.
And I know that at some point there will be a second edition of the book because so much has happened since the first one came out. So that will happen eventually when I feel up to it.
Well, talking about your book, I think I brought your website up there.
Thank you.
So
Yeah. So
maybe
for
talk a little
those
bit
of
of
you who are
this.
interested, yeah, who are interested in learning more in depth about my story, learning more about what you can do with concussion recovery, how to move forward in some way, whether it's you who's experienced one, doesn't matter how long ago it was, or someone that you know, because a lot of times people with brain injuries have a hard time reading. So I fully understand and recognize that. So sometimes it's really nice to have someone who is close to the person with the brain injury to read something like this, and it's only about 100 pages, so that you can have some good discussions, but also be able to provide some resources when they are wanted.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, so headofhope.com is the website, and for those of you who are in Canada, uh, it's best to purchase the book on Amazon and search for the entire title,
Yeah, and I
because
have that here for you too.
shipping between Canada and the US, unfortunately, is outrageously expensive for whatever reason. So it's on Amazon for those of you who like Kindle or who want a paperback copy. It's there.
I have
And
mine right here, and I went through Amazon, of course, because, like you said, it was easier to do it that way. But I'm probably going to end up mailing this to you one day, so you can personally sign it for me, of course,
yay!
and I'll pay for return shipping, of course. But no, I think it's a great read. Like I said, I'm halfway through it. I just had a week where I just couldn't sit and just read a book, so I've been reading it here and there, and I'm loving it. So I know I'll have it read within the next week. It'll be all finished. And then on top of that, if people do want to learn a bit more, we could have went a lot more. Of course, we can stay on here for a couple hours and go more in depth, but I want people to actually purchase the book too, because I want them, they can get more information through this 100 pages than us sitting here for 3-4 hours and talking to them. So
Yeah.
that's why
Yeah.
we're trying to synopsis it a little bit to let people know that, I mean, what you went through is, of course, very serious. It's nothing that we wish on anybody, and it has changed your life. But like you said, it's not all bad. I mean, yes, it's terrible what happened and everything and what you've had to go through. But look at what you've accomplished after that. Like you said, with the having empathy for people, and just, I'm sure a lot of people are going to learn from your story, because a lot of us, I'm sure, go through a lot of this stuff. I know people that are always having some of the symptoms. Why don't you, before we go anywhere, why don't you even give a little bit of what symptoms are for people for TBI, if they're interested in finding out, well, maybe I should go get checked out, because I don't think a lot of people realize
Yeah.
about
And
that.
because guess what? Memory is one of those things. So I'm going to grab my copy because I have it all listed here, and it's so much easier to do that. Yeah, because memory is definitely a challenge, particularly short-term memory. It's like one of those things, I can remember phone numbers from childhood, but I can't remember why I walked into a room, like what I
Yeah.
was supposed to be doing.
Maybe I have a traumatic
So,
brain injury, because I have that problem all the time. That's just age
well,
for me.
yeah. So some of the things that are really common. So cognitively, memory problems, problems with executive functioning. So that emotional dysregulation, things that control behavior, difficulty learning new things, trouble concentrating or focusing. Yeah, squirrel. Very much. Difficulty problem solving. You can also have brain fog. Like my brain fog in the mornings is horrible. Physically, headaches are common, blurred vision or other vision changes, dizziness or lightheadedness, either one. Fatigue, which can be mild to severe, particularly neurofatigue is really common. So anything
Okay.
that's like really going to make you use your brain, social engagements, like, holidays. Oh my gosh, they're so draining. They're great, but getting together with people can be very draining. Reading things, stuff like that. So neurofatigue, as well as fatigue, physically, both. Sensitivity to light and sound. Yeah. Uh, Even over 9 years later, I always carry earplugs with me, sunglasses, you know, um, and sleep disturbances. Sadly, every TBI person I know has sleep issues.
Okay.
Why exactly? I haven't dug into the very specifics, but that's a very common thing. Emotional things, depression, anxiety, easily irritable or angry, personality changes, more emotional than normal.
Mm-hmm.
So just kind of a heightened emotional response, the inability to control those emotions. And sometimes people are a bit more impulsive.
Okay.
So those are some of the things
Mm-hmm.
that are common.
And we're not
Most
saying
people
that just
just think
because
of
they
like,
have those that they're going to have TBI, but at least it's something to look for.
right. And what would have been helpful is if the ER people had said, statistically, you're likely going to be fine in 2 weeks because 80% of people go back to quote normal in about that 2 week or to maybe a couple month time frame. But as I said, like as a child, I was this like overachiever person in school. Well, I guess I'm always striving to be in that top 20, 25%.
Yep.
Because I ended up in that top 20% who does not go back to quote normal.
Mm-hmm.
But if they had said, likely you'll be fine in a couple weeks to a couple months. But if they'd given me a list of these things to kind of be on the lookout for
Mm-hmm.
and said, but if you notice that you start to have these things, or if they don't go away, then,
Come back and see us.
obviously if they'd said, go see someone,
Mm-hmm.
would have been helpful. And so figuring all that out and researching myself and realizing that as an educated healthcare provider who knew people,
Mm-hmm.
and I didn't know what to do or who to see or what could help, I knew that I could not keep that to myself and that I had to let other people know by writing this brief book, because it's hard to find a cohesive, like, one place where you can learn about what the experience is, that you're not alone. That's a
Mm-hmm.
huge, huge piece, is knowing that you're not alone, because it's a very lonely process,
No,
especially when
definitely.
you're dealing with things like the depression, anxiety, PTSD, but also just the grief of not being who you were anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And you didn't get a choice in that. It was
No.
a split second thing that changed your life forever, and you got
Yep.
no say in it.
No,
It wasn't
exactly.
anything that you necessarily did
Mm-hmm.
or didn't do. It just, things
Yep.
happen.
And things sometimes pop up from earlier on in your life that you don't know. I didn't find this out until around 2005, 2006, when I was living in Edmonton, Canada. There, I had a doctor there, and I kept telling him my right arm always feels like a pinched nerve, and it's always getting like numb kind of thing. And I knew it was a heart attack. I wasn't having any heart issues in that, but I said I don't. It's always when that's the bag, the shoulder. I carry my hockey bag or I carry my gym bag, things like. So I wondered if I pinched a nerve or something. So they did X-rays, and it wasn't until then he found out that actually up in my neck, I think it's like the C6 and C7 vertebrae, I actually have a disintegrating and narrowing disc in my spine there that I never knew about. And he said, you could have injured yourself when you were younger as a kid. You could have fell or twisted or playing hockey and got hit there and never would have known it. And then that's when he was telling me, you're probably getting lower back pain. I said, yeah, I get lower back pain all the time. But this is probably like 20 years after I ever probably injured it, and I didn't know.
Yeah.
So you never know
Yeah.
sometimes. And that's the one thing I love about your book. Because like you said, all the stuff you're talking about, people shake off a lot. And you didn't have back then that one resource that you can go to and say, like, what am I doing? And you've basically done the research, of course, over the last 10 years or whatever, since it, well, 7, 8, 9 years now, I guess. And you put it in this book, in this 100 pages. So it's a lot to take in, but it's very, very well written. And I think they can get a lot in there. And I think on top of that, too, while we're on it, I'm going to go back to your website here, because I think if people want to find out a little bit more, I hit the wrong button there. 1 second there. They can go into your blog area, which I think is a very big
Yes.
resource guide for people. That I'm just going to get your blog up here, because you have a lot of little different like podcasts or just little video type things that they can read, or blogs themselves.
Yep. Yep. So there's a lot of things that are talked about on the blog, more of the things that have surfaced over the last couple of years. You can see there, congratulations, you're disabled. Getting proof for disability, and lots of other things. So a lot of them are TBI specific, but not necessarily, especially as I have come up with more diagnoses added to that. broaden that a bit. But even just talking about, coming to terms with living with a chronic illness,
Mm-hmm.
a lot of people can relate to that. There's a lot in common that
Mm-hmm.
people even without a TBI can relate to. And yep, there's a lot, a lot of things on grief. There's been a lot of grief to process over the years.
Yeah, but even you have some like powerful stuff here, like traumatic brain injury, yoga, and love your brain. So you're starting to show them a little bit that yeah, you have a brain injury, but here's what you can do. You don't have to just curl up and sit in a corner. You still got to live.
Exactly. And there's a program called Love Your Brain, and they are in Canada now, thankfully. It is a yoga program specifically designed for those affected by traumatic brain injury. So both the people who do have a TBI, but also their caregivers and family, and it is free to participants. And so as a yoga instructor and a TBI person, when I learned about that program, it was a no-brainer to go through their certification program to teach that. So yeah, there's all these resources out there, and so my goal is to share those with the world so that you can have a place where you can learn about it, or come for additional resources and
I
figure out
recommend anybody
what you
go to your
want to do.
website. Yeah, I recommend people go to your website because there's a lot of resource on there that they can get from. I do recommend people get your book. And like you said, if you're in the States, I would go to, it's headofhope.com. I'll put it in the comment section there, but headofhope.com. Go check it out. Purchase the book. It's not expensive. But there's so much knowledge. I mean, you could have charged a lot more than what you're charging on there. That's how much information I feel is in there. And if you're in Canada, you can get it off of Google. Amazon. That's what I did. I just went on Amazon.ca. I found my copy and I had it shipped to me, and I had it within like less than a week, I think it was. It wasn't long at all. You pay for it and boom, it's at your door. I recommend people go check it out. If they want to contact you, if they have any questions for you, or if they want to just pick your brain, as no pun intended there, but
Yeah, good one.
if they have anything, how can they contact you? I guess through your website. And
Sure. Yeah, there's the contact form on the site there, or through socials. Instagram, I'm at head of hope TBI, but there's links to socials up on the website there too in the right hand corner.
Definitely.
So website is preferred because that'll go to email, but you can find me on Facebook. Also, head of hope TBI, and yep, there's questions, feedback, and if you want to have the blog sent to your inbox, you can sign up for the newsletter down on your bottom right.
Right down there. Yeah.
At this point, like, there's nothing else that's going to go out, so you're not going to get spammed. You're not going to get stuff every day or every week. It's going to be when I feel like writing a blog post, which happens anywhere from like once a month to a couple, like once a quarter. Sometimes I have nothing to say for a little bit, and that's fine. And then other times I have all these ideas of things to share. So, yep, definitely ways to connect with me after we end tonight.
No, definitely. And I'm going to finish this book this week. I know I will, or at least next week sometime. And do you have any final things that you would like to get out there? We have actually a past guest of ours, Michelle Quay, who was on our show probably around, I think it was like September, October, in that area. I think it was around October, and very inspiring lady. And she is watching tonight, and she said, very inspiring story. You have endured a lot of the unspeakable pain and challenges, and kudos to Jennifer. So a lot of people are watching. They're loving you.
From someone who gets that too. Yeah. I think the greatest takeaways from this journey so far, the greatest one is that I would encourage people to do, whether they're dealing with a TBI or any other challenging thing in their life, whether it's health related or something else, is to do your best to just keep moving forward in some way. Mm-hmm. And to not give up, because believe me, there are times where I've wanted to give up. Absolutely. I've wanted to just be done. Mm-hmm. But to move forward in some way, even on those days where I'm on the couch all day, it's like, for me to move forward, it's like, oh, maybe today I'm going to get dressed and get out of my sweats and like go for a walk around the neighborhood, or, pet my cat or something. But it's adaptable, right? We have to be able to be flexible and adaptable and define what that looks for us in any given moment. But get support, get the support that you need, ask for help, and move forward in some way, because there are going to be some amazing lessons that you're going to learn. It's going to be painful, it's going to suck, but there's always a gift in it. Maybe not in any time frame that you're expecting. Could be days, could be decades before you figure out what that gift is, or the gifts. But if you're open to them, you'll figure them out. But
No, definitely.
it's just, keep moving forward in some way, however that looks to you in the moment.
And I think it goes on to that old saying. It sounds so cliche, but that old saying where sometimes it's just okay to be not okay.
Absolutely.
There's going to be times, and then it's up
Absolutely.
to, hopefully you have that support system like you did with your husband and your family, that you
Mm-hmm.
can
Yep.
lean on them when you need them, because there are going to be times when, I mean, that goes on in everybody's life, no matter when you have a brain injury and that, but especially when you have
Absolutely.
a trauma like that, you're going to need people to lean on, because you're not always going to be okay. And you're going to need those days where you just say, you know what, just leave me alone. I just need to sit in the corner. But as long as you know you
For
have that
sure.
support system, that whenever you're ready, they're there for you. That's all I think a lot of people need. They just need to be heard, I think.
Absolutely. And for me, one of the greatest gifts this last year, even since May, is joining a TBI support group. And we meet on Zoom weekly, and it's been phenomenal. And I've got support groups for some of my other diagnoses as well. And those support groups of having people who get it,
Hmm.
people who are in there with you and they know it. And even though our stories and backgrounds are different, but there's that level of understanding that you don't get anywhere else. So support groups are really valuable, and
And
more so than I
maybe
realized.
and maybe you can, when we're done here sometime tonight or tomorrow, you can go in the comment section and leave some of those links there for some of those, like some places you think that people can reach out to and things like that. Some of the links to those support groups. I think that'd be great. I'm
Mm-hmm.
sure a lot of them would love to know how to get that support system if they don't have it in their own home.
Yep. Yep.
So I want to thank you for being here, because I know I learned a lot. I learned a lot. I've been talking to you now for about over a month now, because it's been since before, way
Mm-hmm.
before Christmas that we met, and we got talking on Zoom, and
Yeah.
then I got your book, and then we talked a little bit last week, I think it was, and just, I mean, I can see that you're gonna there's something around the corner for you that's gonna be not just good for you, but it's going to be inspiring for other people. I can see you doing something that's going to inspire a lot of people, and hopefully empower them
Oh, thank you.
to do things. I can see you're not somebody who's just going to sit down. You're going to fight, and you're going to get out there, and you're going to be. I think you're going to be okay.
I will be okay, and I am okay. And it's taken a long time to be able to get to that place of just knowing that even with all these challenges every day, I
Hmm.
still am okay.
That's
And
good.
there are moments when I'm not,
Hmm.
but in the bigger picture, I am okay, and I will be okay no matter what happens.
And I hope you keep in touch with us, and hopefully maybe we'll get you back on here in a little, maybe in a year or so, and we'll do another little recap on how things are going and stuff. Because I know
That'd be
I'm going to
great.
keep in touch with you, but I'm sure they would all like to hear from you too. So,
Wonderful. That would be
so
wonderful.
awesome. So I want to thank you for coming on here. And if you want to stick around in the background there, and to everybody else out there, I want to thank you for tuning in for another episode of Butler's Babble. It's because of you guys out there watching that we can keep bringing these on. And we have a couple more people that we've got lined up over the next couple months that I think you're going to love to see. For all those, like I said, who haven't seen any of the other episodes, or you want to rewatch them, they're all on the YouTube channel, youtube.com/at Butler's Babble. You can go and watch the whole archive on there. And there's so many awesome people out there that I think you should just give the chance to listen to. And like Jennifer said today, have empathy for others and of what they're going through. And hopefully you learned something today. And we'll be back next month with another amazing guest. And until then, we'll see you later. And remember, if anybody asks, say the butler did it. Talk to you next time.